Thank you and good morning. I am New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, and I'm here today to announce the results of Operation Dirty Dope, a major takedown of a massive heroin smuggling operation that ran from Mexico through Arizona to New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and across the region. And I'm tremendously proud to be here today with some great colleagues in law enforcement. Major David Candelaria, Troop Commander for Troop L of the New York State Police, Chief Ernest Martineau of the Fitchburg, Massachusetts Police Department, Chief Michael Goldman from the Leominster Police Department, also in Massachusetts, and DEA Special Agent in Charge James Hunt, and of course Perry Kadenoff, who runs our Organized Crime Task Force. We're here today to announce indictments against 25 people across the nation, from Tucson, Arizona, to the Bronx and Long Island, and all across the Northeast. That includes 8 who have been charged as major traffickers, which means they face life sentences. The indictments lay out a broad and extremely sophisticated scheme to bring deadly drugs into our communities. And as alleged in our indictments, investigators from my office, the state police, and our partners used wiretaps, confidential informants, and undercover surveillance to track these men trafficking heroin and fentanyl throughout the region. All told, we seized more than 33 kilos of heroin and 2 kilos of highly potent fentanyl. You can see the drugs here. This is an extraordinary takedown. This is a huge quantity of dangerous drugs. The heroin alone has a street value of more than $13 million. This is one of our state's biggest heroin takedowns, and it is the largest drug bust in the history of the Office of the New York State Attorney General and our Organized Crime Task Force. Ladies and gentlemen, tragically, we bear witness every day to the lethal power of heroin. But the drug ring we've taken down today did not just rely on the lethal potency of heroin to make their profits. They mixed their heroin with everything from Novocaine to nail polish remover to chicken anesthetic. And we have some of the products right here. Boric acid. This is roach killer, ladies and gentlemen. They were mixing their heroin with roach killer. These adulterants were added with one cruel and singular goal in mind: to increase products with no regard to the suffering and death they were going to cause. And adding deadly cutting agents to heroin boosted the weight of their product, making smaller amounts of heroin more lucrative each step of the way. The rampant increase in these dangerous adulterants across the country is a new and frightening challenge. It's facing law enforcement, facing doctors and others who work in emergency rooms, and facing all drug treatment professionals. In recent months, we've seen scores of people who overdosed on heroin that they didn't know was laced with dangerous chemicals. Last month, more than 200 residents of Cincinnati, Ohio, overdosed after taking heroin laced with a powerful animal tranquilizer that's meant only to be used on large livestock or elephants. And earlier this month on Staten Island, a bad batch of heroin was allegedly responsible for 9 fatal overdoses in 10 days. We cannot and we will not allow drug dealers to peddle death in our communities. And as you can see on the chart over here, the smuggling ring had tentacles that reached across the country. These are the individuals, and you can see identified where they came from. But this chart shows the pattern of distribution. This ring had links to the Sinaloa drug cartel, and the individual we apprehended in Arizona would travel back and forth to Mexico to obtain the heroin, which he would then distribute all over the Northeast. During the bust, in fact, we seized a handgun, and this is really remarkable. We seized a handgun that is right in front of you, I believe, with the logo of the Sinaloa drug cartel on the label. This is a gun that represents the fact that these folks know they're dealing death. They're proud of the fact they're dealing death. This is a Mexican drug cartel extending its tentacles into New York and Massachusetts and other parts of the Northeast. The drugs were smuggled in the hidden compartments of cars and vans from Tucson up to the Bronx and throughout the eastern seaboard. And there were highly sophisticated compartments or traps in many of these cars. To open one of the hidden traps, you had to first turn on the windshield wiper, then turn on the blinker, and then turn on the window switch in the right direction, and then the trap would open and you could find the hidden compartment. It took our experts 2 hours to open one of the most sophisticated traps. And we even found these complex traps in the homes of some of the defendants, where you had to turn on the TV remote in a certain way to open the trap. This was a very sophisticated operation, and this was a completely soulless operation. They were lacing their products with things they knew killed people. And after the drugs then arrived via these hidden compartments in the Bronx, they were distributed throughout the region, especially in Suffolk County, on Long Island, and Leominster, a small city in central Massachusetts, both Suffolk County and central Massachusetts dealing with major heroin crises. The traffickers allegedly carried the drugs on board buses that ran between cities as well. And my office and the state police have been working shoulder to shoulder with our colleagues in Massachusetts and the Massachusetts DEA Task Force on this case from the start, and I want to take a moment to specifically thank them for their leadership, particularly Chief Martineau and Chief Goldman for making the trip to New York for this event today. And I also want to make it very clear that everyone who we are charging today is charged with selling or trafficking drugs. People struggling with addiction are not and will not be our targets. In fact, people struggling with addiction were the targets of these traffickers. We allege that they sometimes used addicts as human guinea pigs to test the heroin laced with deadly cutting agents just to see if it killed them. We're talking about a very deep level of cynicism. We're talking about some of the worst folks that we've taken down in the long history of this office's organized crime task force. Their callousness was astonishing and heartbreaking. My office has and we will continue to join with all other government agencies and advocates across the state to help lead the fight against the opioid crisis that is overtaking our communities. The fight is hard, it is urgent. All told, in the past 5 years, our organized crime task force has now busted more than 30 large narcotics trafficking gangs, made more than 700 felony narcotics arrests, and seized millions in cash and more than a ton of illegal guns, along with hundreds of firearms. Again, as you can see from the weapons here, this was a very violent group of people. They were very sophisticated, they were deeply cynical, and they were violent. Just this summer, we indicted more than 100 drug dealers in central New York. Operation Smackdown, which we announced this summer, was the biggest drug bust in Syracuse history. We are doing our part with our colleagues in law enforcement. But ladies and gentlemen, we know that we cannot arrest our way out of a drug epidemic. Law enforcement alone will not stop heroin and opioid abuse. That's why we have worked hard to craft a multi-layered response to this crisis. Beyond the tremendous work that our organized crime task force has done, along with our colleagues, to get these dangerous drugs off the street, we've also helped train and supply New York law enforcement officers with the overdose antidote, naloxone. We turned more than $5 million in forfeited funds from criminals into more than 50,000 naloxone kits statewide. We have worked with the manufacturers of naloxone to ensure that our first responders and our police can get it at a reasonable price. We also recognize that opioid addiction often starts in the medicine cabinet. And that's why in July 2012, we launched the Internet System for Stopping Overprescribing, or iStop. iStop is unique in the United States. I hope that will not be true much longer. But the goal of iStop is to arm doctors and pharmacists with the information they need to avoid prescribing painkillers to those who are abusing drugs, while ensuring that patients who truly need the medications get them. Uniquely, in New York, your doctor and pharmacist has to consult a real-time database to see if you have 1 oxycodone prescription or 4. And according to the State Department of Health, doctor shopping dropped 75% in New York in the first year of the iStop program. We are urging our counterparts in other states, and we're urging the federal government to make this a national program, and I am very optimistic of our prospects in the next year of making this a national program. So there's a long fight still ahead of us in battling the heroin crisis, but today's arrests, along with the coordinated efforts of government officials, doctors, counselors, law enforcement, mark another vital step towards curbing this crisis once and for all. Again, I want to thank our partners in this fight. The New York State Police are tremendous partners to us. at all times, and I'm very pleased that we were able to work with them so closely. The Massachusetts DEA Task Force and local law enforcement officials in Massachusetts all provided tremendous leadership in this phase. And other agencies that we haven't really referred to have been helping us in this takedowns, the authorities in other states that helped us apprehend some of these perpetrators when we started going after them in the last day or so, and particularly the New York City Police Department, always a good partner to us in every investigation. My office will continue to work with our partners in law enforcement to drive these dealers out of business and to keep them out of business. I thank you for joining me here today, and I would now like to introduce a great partner in this and many other investigations, Major David Candelaria, Troop Commander for Troop L of the New York State Police.
Good morning. I'm New York State Police Major David Candelaria, Troop Commander of Long Island. I want to thank our Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman.
Thank you.
And I need to applaud the efforts of my New York State Police Troop L Narcotics Enforcement Unit. In addition, I want to thank the Attorney General's Organized Crime Task Force, the DEA Worcester, Massachusetts HIDTA Task Force, the New York City Police Department, specifically the 52nd Precinct, and all our other out-of-state law enforcement agencies for their partnership in making these arrests. This is a significant case that reached across the United States, from Arizona to Massachusetts. We are taking dozens of dangerous drug traffickers off of the streets, along with multiple kilos of heroin. The heroin we seized in this case is a lethal mix. It was cut with a narcotic painkiller that is exponentially more powerful than heroin. The individuals charged in this case had no regard for the damage or danger they would have caused. This case speaks to the interagency coordination and cooperation it takes to stop large quantities of drugs from ending up on our streets. To all the agencies, again, I thank you for your support, your partnership, and for the great work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Thank you, Major.
Thank you very much. And now, if you will identify yourselves to Eric Sufer, we'll open it up for questions.
Name and outlet, please. Matt Chase from Newsday. Can you discuss the connection with Suffolk County with locations if possible?
Sure. It's important to recognize the fact that our friends and our partners in Troop L really were the ones who flagged this for us initially. This initially came to us in reports of the concern, and as you know, Long Island is facing a very severe heroin and opioid problem. So they were the ones who originally brought us in. But do you want to?
Started off in Brentwood.
Do you want to? It started off in Brentwood, but do you want to say anything more about specific locations, or it was pretty much a countywide problem. It started off in Brentwood, but it was a huge problem out there, and they were on it. They were dogged. They reached out to us, and that's how we launched this whole national effort and realized that it went far beyond the boundaries of Suffolk County.
And what happened in Brentwood? What was going on there?
I mean, there were a lot of people experiencing heroin overdoses. There was a lot of heroin dealing going on, and they realized that we were dealing with heroin that was cut with very dangerous products. They realized that was happening out there. They flagged it before anyone else, and they brought it to us, and we've been working with them ever since.
And it started with an informant. It started with an informant. I can say that.
Well, it's all set forth in our indictment. It's drug dealing, but the important thing to recognize about this particular gang is the complete callousness with which they used deadly products to lace their heroin. It's one thing to have people overdosing on heroin. Naloxone can help revive them. We know how to treat people for heroin. When you show up in an emergency room and you've got heroin that's laced with roach powder or laced with acetone or something else, there are chemicals here. This is a chemical that was banned decades ago because it causes cancer. So that was what made this gang really stand out, and that was what brought this to the attention of our colleagues on Long Island. It started with a confidential informant, and they took it from there. They brought it to us, and we've worked seamlessly with them to deal with the problem.
Addie Baird from Politico. Could you talk a little bit about, is this the first time you've seen fentanyl in an operation like this, or is it something that you've seen in operations in the past? As far as I understand, it's a chemical that it's new to kind of the heroin deals within New York. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, no, fentanyl actually has been showing up before. It is relatively new, but it's been around, and we see it in other parts of the state. What we have not seen are people who would use products like roach powder in this volume to cut their heroin. And again, they viewed addicts essentially as guinea pigs. They would actually test some of this stuff on addicts to see if they got sick or see if they died. This is a level of cynicism that even among drug dealers makes this gang stand out.
When did you start to see fentanyl in these sort of crackdowns? Do you know?
In the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, this is not new. This has been, in the last few years, fentanyl's been emerging, and it's very dangerous. And again, it poses special problems for treatment professionals. But in the last few years, we've seen a rise in the use of fentanyl and lacing of heroin with fentanyl.
Scott Pringle, NBC News Radio. You mentioned this is the largest takedown in New York. How much of a dent does this put into drug dealing in our area?
Well, it puts a dent in, but again, as I said, you can't arrest yourself out of a drug epidemic. I mean, this is one part of a multi-lever strategy. We have to educate people. We have to perfect our I-Stop system nationally. A lot of people get addicted through their use of prescription opioids, and then when their prescription runs out, they will turn to heroin, which is available, is cheaper, and is stronger. So it really requires a multi-level approach. What I will say about this gang is we're getting some of the most dangerous products off the streets of New York and off the streets in Massachusetts and other places because of the really unprecedented level to which they would cut their heroin with these dangerous products. So it makes a dent in the heroin crisis, but it makes a major dent in this particularly dangerous and pernicious product that they were distributing.
Juliet Papa, 10 Minutes. So where do these cartels get fentanyl? This is prescription medication, and where do they
Made in
take it?
Mexico.
So the transport back and forth to Mexico was to pick up heroin, but also to pick up fentanyl. I mean, this is we have so many piles of stuff here, it's hard to tell where it is. But in the green bag here, that's 2 pounds?
2 kilos.
2 kilos of fentanyl. That's a lot of fentanyl. But that also came from the Sinaloa cartel.
And is that black market? Is that how they're buying it?
Yes, yeah.
No, there's not controlled and not free.
Yes, it's illegal here, but the fentanyl there is not really controlled in Mexico. But it's black market. It's illegal here. They were running down to Mexico to get heroin, but also to get fentanyl. So the whole scheme, this whole dirty dope operation, was an operation in which they all understood that they were not just heroin dealers. They were dealers in a dangerously adulterated heroin. That was the entire MO of this operation.
Ty Milberg, News 12. To your knowledge, were there any deaths that were related to this?
We can't hard to say. I mean, there have been a lot of deaths from heroin and from heroin laced with deadly products. It's hard to tell who bought what from who, but
Ongoing investigation.
it's an ongoing investigation, and we are continuing to probe further down the supply chain of where they dealt the drugs. But there have been a lot of deaths from adulterated products, and I'm confident that some of them were caused by products that came out of this particular ring.
Where was the Tang found and the iced tea?
Specific locations? Is it in the Bronx?
The traps were found in one of the defendants' homes.
Yeah, without getting into the specifics, I mean, the traps, these are some of the less sophisticated traps. This looks like a regular thing of Tang. This is the top, but they had fixed the bottom, so you had to go and know the right technique to unlock the bottom to find the trap. So these were found in the homes of some of the defendants. And again, these are just some of the least sophisticated traps. The fact that these folks had systems in place where you'd have to use your TV remote control to enable you to open a trap. This is an unusual level of sophistication. This is a huge operation. It was very sophisticated, and as I said, it was self-consciously an operation to deal in adulterated heroin that at a level at which we have not seen before.
More on topic. Every else will go behind the cameras. Here's one. I miss it. When you go over the role of the 52nd precinct in the Bronx and how they got involved and what was happening in the Bronx problem.
The defendants were processed there last night.
There were a bunch of the defendants, as you can see from the chart here, a lot of the defendants were in the Bronx, and that's where we picked a lot of them up, and a lot of them were processed at the 52nd Precinct in the Bronx last night. The 5-2 were great partners in this. They did a great job of helping us apprehend these suspects. Okay.
Rob Nelson at the ABC. Can you explain a little bit more about why they are cutting this heroin with these dangerous chemicals? Does it increase the high, increase the value they sell it for? What's the motivation?
Well, the motivation is you can sell less heroin, which is expensive, and by cutting it with much cheaper product, if you don't care about the effect on the heroin user, if you don't care about the health consequences, if you don't care if people die. This was strictly about money, and they acted with a callous disregard for the suffering and the death they would cause.
Do you think that the war on drugs is a success?
Well, I think it's fair to say we're dealing with a new epidemic in the last few years of a resurgence of heroin all over America. It's a different problem than what we faced before. Heroin is stronger, it is cheaper, and for me, most tragically, the stigma that used to be associated with heroin, when even people who were hard partying teenagers would drink or take some other drugs, they would stay away from heroin. That was something that was off limits. That was viewed as too serious, too severe. That stigma is now gone. So we're facing a different type of drug epidemic now, and we have to respond accordingly.
Is there a different approach because the users are now white and past it and black?
Well, I think there are a lot of different approaches, and not just related to that fact, but it is important to note that it is not by any means a problem of people in poor communities of color. This is a problem in suburbs. It's a huge problem on college campuses all across America. So we're adjusting accordingly, but it is the spread of the use of heroin and the loss of the stigma associated with heroin over the last 5 years has been astonishing to watch, and it's a devastating problem. Again, we have to stop people who would never start out going to a heroin dealer from getting hooked on prescription opioids. We need to make the I-STOP system a national system. We have to do more by way of making sure every law enforcement officer and first responder in the country has access to naloxone. We have to do more with education, and we have to continue our law enforcement activities, particularly as it relates to folks like this particularly pernicious gang whose MO, as I said, was not just to sell heroin. It was to sell heroin laced with deadly cutting agents. Okay.
Do you have any comments on Anthony Weiner's sexting with a 15-year-old allegedly?
No,
You're not investigating it at all?
I have no comment.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.